Merging and joining data frames. Merging or joining two data frames is when we bring two datasets together and align the rows based on common columns, much like primary keys. To merge data frames in Pandas, we use the merge method. We can call it either directly on a data frame or on a Pandas object. Let's start by calling it on the Pandas object, which means we will need to preface it with PD. Within the command, we pass the left and right data frames, the columns to match on, and the type of merge we want to perform, such as the left, right, inner, or outer. These parameters are left, right, how, and on. As an example, we are going to use two data frames, one with our player data and one with our player info. First, let's look at each of the data frame to see what columns they have. So I read in the two data frames, and one we see has the player ID, along with many columns of the player stats, and the other has the player ID along with the player name. You'll notice the first data frame does not have the player name. And the common column between the two is player ID. This means we're going to use the player ID column to merge data frames. So again, to merge the data frames, we will use the PD, which is our alias for pandas, dot merge. And the parameter is going to take the left data frame, which is df1, the right data frame, which is df2, and the on parameter, which is where we pass it the column we want to merge on, which in this case is player ID. And let's save this to a new data frame to know what we're dealing with. And if we look at the first, or let's look at a sample 10 rows. And that's because it was merged df. We see we now have a new data frame, merge df, that has the player name joined on the right side. So what did we do? Well, we started with our initial data frame, which had all of the player stats. This is a nice data frame, but we can't easily identify player IDs since it was just numbers. This is why we wanted to merge the second data frame so we can add player name, which is currently only in the df2 data frame. The last argument we pass is the on, which is where we specify the common column between the left and right data frames. In this case, it is player ID, which happens to be the unique column of each. We saved the merged data frame into a new data frame and then looked at a sample 10 rows. And again, I love looking at the players that came out as a sample. Now, we can get a little fancy with how we run merges. For example, if you only want to specify certain columns in the merge, then you can add this into the command. Let's say we only wanted certain columns from the df2 data frame that had a lot of stat columns. We could again write the PD merge. It will say, let's this time do df2 to start, followed by df1. And here we will need to take that double brackets, or a Python list, and we can input the columns that we want in the merge. So let's say we took these columns, player ID, season ID, assists, steal, and points. And then after here, we'll go comma. And how are we going to merge? On the player ID column. And again, let's save this as merged df2. And let's look at a sample 10. Notice how this time we only get the column specified from df1. Now, at the beginning, I said there were 4 parameters: the data frames to merge, the on method, and the how. Now, we didn't call the how, which means we use the default pandas behavior, which is an inner merge, which is really just like an inner join. This means we only keep the rows where the merge on column exists in both the left and right data frames. That means if there is no player ID for a player in one of the data frames, they would be dropped from the final result. Again, depending on which merge type you want to use, you need to tell pandas in the how parameter. We could run our same command and tell it to use the innerMerge. Even though that was the default, we should still get the same columns. So let's take the same data frame. We'll call it merge df3. And let's add our fourth parameter, how, and this is going to be inner. And then if we sample this, and again, the sample is going to take a different 10 rows from our data frame, but you'll notice they are the same, have the same columns in the same ordering. The other types of merges we can do with data frames are similar to SQL. So let's create a couple more basic data frames to explore. Now here I had a dictionary with some raw data, and I just selected some players at random. So let's go ahead and create the data frame. And it takes our raw data as the input, and the columns equals player ID, first name, last name, and let's save this into DFA. And first we got to run that. And then let's take another raw dictionary I have that has the same player IDs, but this time we are going to save this as DFB, and it will have the player ID and the career points per game. So let's first do a left merge, which is just like an outer join. This will keep every row in the left data frame and try and match the right data frame based on the on column. If the right data frame doesn't have any values, then non-values will be appended. So again, we'd write the PD merge, and we want to take data frame A and data frame B, and we're going to merge it on player ID, and how this time is going to be a left. And let's save this as left merge. And if we look at left merge, we'll see that Pandas added in the non-values, since we did not have the points per game for those two player IDs. We can also similarly run a right merge, aka a right outer join. This will keep every row in the right data frame and try and match the left data frame based on the on column. If the left data frame doesn't have any of the values, then the non-values will be added. So let's come here, copy this over, we'll call it a right merge, and how will be right. And if we look at the right merge, you'll see this time it only keeps the players where it had the points per game in DFB. We can also run an outer merge, aka a full outer join. This returns all the rows from both the left and right data frames and tries to match up the rows whenever possible. Anything that doesn't match is replaced with non-values. So again, this is actually going to give us a similar result to our left merge. However, just to see, the outer will add the non in. Up until now, we've gotten lucky that the column names we are joining on have identical names and data types. But what happens if the names are different? Luckily for us, Pandas has a solution. The merge method can also take two new arguments, LeftOn and RightOn. This allows us to clarify which columns we want to merge on for each data frame. So let's take the similar raw data like we had before, but this time let's change it to ID as the column name rather than player ID. So again, we take our PD merge, we pass in our data frame 1, our data frame 2, how, let's do a right join, We tell it the LeftOn is going to be the ID for this column, and the RightOn is going to equal player ID, since that's the name of our df2 column name. It's basically saying, hey, these are pandas, these are the same thing. However, one is called ID and one is called player ID. Let's save this to df3, and if we run it and print it, we'll see we have our join. However, you may have noticed it used both the player ID and the ID columns. And do you notice anything different? Pandas brings in both copies of the left and the right columns, so now we have duplicate column names. One way we can handle this is by calling the drop method at the end of the chain, passing in the column name and the column axis. So let's say we actually thought the player ID was more descriptive. So we come back here, and then let's chain saying drop the ID column. And to let you pandas know it's a column, we give it an axis 1. And let's save this as df4. And now if we look at this, you'll see the ID column is gone and we just have the player ID. Great. And one last call out for this section. We can also call the merge directly on a data frame. So instead of calling it on the pandas object, we would pass the left data frame and then use the dot notation for the merge. Everything else remains the same, but it would look like this. So instead of starting with the pd.merge, we would actually write df1.merge, and now we're passing in the right data frame. How, we'll say inner, which is really like a left. Go LeftOn equals ID, and RightOn equals player ID. And let's continue with the chain of saying let's drop player ID this time around, and it's a column. And let's all save this to df5, and voila.